Hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for tuning into this screen tutorial on the brand new GCSE 9 to 1 History Edexcel examination commencing in 2018. This is going to focus on the paper 2 element that I'm currently teaching, Superpower Relations in the Cold War 1941 to 1991. This is what the paper will look like. This is your rubric or structure, if you will. There are 3 questions for this half of paper 2. The first question, worth 8 marks, and the focus is on consequences. The second question, 8 marks, and you have to provide an analytical narrative. The third and final question for this half of the paper is worth 16 marks in total, and it focuses on consequence, significance, importance. Edexcel advise that you spend about 50 minutes on this part of the paper, as can be seen there. Your second half will be on your British depth study, and it's suggested you spend slightly longer to give you some time to come back and check all your answers. Now, the mark scheme for this Cold War international relations paper is broken into 2 sort of separate elements. When we talk about AO1, we're looking at subject knowledge, subject-specific knowledge, and conceptual understanding. Subject knowledge understanding. For AO2, we're talking about second order concepts, so the historical foci, be it significance, cause consequence, change continuity, that sort of stuff. In this paper, it mainly focuses on importance, consequence, significance, effects. So that should help you demystify the mark scheme somewhat. Okay, here's your syllabi or curriculum content that you'll need to learn. It's broken into 3 sort of headings: origins of the Cold War crises, and then finally the end of the Cold War right up to Gorbachev's reign and the collapse of the Soviet Union, Warsaw Pact. If I'm teaching you, this Cold War unit or section will be examined on paper 2 along with Henry VIII and his ministers, but it may be different if you're at a different school. If I'm not your teacher, please check with your teacher. Okay, so let's have a look at these 3 questions, how they're set up, the mark scheme, and we'll give you some examples of what success might look like. Okay, so an exemplar question is explain 2 consequences of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Obviously, the actual descriptor there might change, but the stem will always remain the same. You have to give 2 consequences completely separate from each other. Consequence 1 and then consequence 2. The mark scheme, what's the AO1 and AO2? So we're looking for 4 marks for AO1 and then 4 marks for AO2. AO1, subject knowledge. AO2 here, consequences. We're looking for features of the period that are analysed to explain a consequence. And then we need specific subject information showing good knowledge and an understanding of the period. Okay, so when looking at, well, here's a different example. When looking at the question here, conceptually we need to understand that events in history can be broken down into the things that caused them, the actual events or occurrences, or the consequences and aftermath, importance, significance. That's where we are with this question. You'll get no marks talking about the causes or events. You must talk about the consequences. So it says here, allow 10 minutes to write your answer. Write about each consequence. You're given just over half a page for each. You don't necessarily need to write any more than that. You should keep the answer brief and not try to add information on extra lines, otherwise you just run out of time. This will make sure that, as it says, you leave sufficient time for later questions. Make sure you focus on the consequence using stems or leading language as a result, as a consequence, the effects. So just remember, this is where we need to be for question 1, consequences. In terms of potential scaffolding, you want to make sure that the language you use to construct or scaffold your answer leads you and the examiner to talking about, consequences, so you're absolutely on point because you won't have time to waffle or waste. So one consequence of the Cuban Missile Crisis was because, due to the fact that, however, these are not mandatory. These are just there to help you talk about exactly what you need to talk about, which is consequences. And there's a little checklist there for you to have a look at. You just need to make sure you talk about 2 of them, and they're approximately 100 words in length for each. Here's an exemplar of a good answer. So we're talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis here. So they've used the leading language to introduce the answer. One consequence of the Cuban Missile Crisis was, etc. So that means they are almost fine-tuning and homing in to the consequence. There's no wasted words or waffle there, straight to where we need to be. Backed up by specific contextual knowledge for our AO1 and demonstrates a clear understanding. They've done that twice. And this is Edexcel's marking here, not mine. Top of level 2 for both responses. Here's my general tips. Discussion of causes or events will score you absolutely nothing, no matter how eloquent or sophisticated it is. You must discuss consequences conceptually. Use leading language to introduce each of the consequences. So one of the consequences of X was. This will make sure that you home in exactly on where you need to be. I would use chronologically close consequences and try to avoid talking about consequences that happened well after the event. For instance, if you're talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, trying to discuss SALT 1 or SALT 2, whilst they may be sort of distant outcomes of the Cuban Missile Crisis because it subsequently leads to detente, they're very chronologically distant, and it's going to be very difficult to make that stick. So use chronologically close consequences as and where possible, and use specific contextual knowledge or AO1 to support each consequences. If you don't, you won't get top marks. Here's an example from a student in my group that answers the same question. If you want to pause that on this page, feel free. That just gives you another example of how to answer the question. And finally, here's a different question. This is two consequences of the decisions made by the Grand Alliance at the Yalta Conference in February 45. Again, you can pause it here if you want. I think we could improve that by using the leading language to introduce each of these consequences, because that will ensure then that you're homing in on exactly what the examiners want to see, which is AO2, talking about the precise second order concept, which is consequences in this instance, backed up by specific contextual knowledge, AO1. So that's how I think we can improve it, but it is a good and strong example nonetheless. Pause it if you'd like to. Okay, the second question. It's all about analytical narratives, all right? A narrative account analysing the key events of something. In this instance, it's the Berlin crisis, the first of the Berlin crises in 48-49. Now, you'll notice here you get 2 bullet points. Thank you, Edexcel, very helpful. But you must add specific information of your own. Just talking about these 2 in and of themselves will not suffice to provide you with top marks, which is 8 in this instance. Okay, so here's the mark scheme then. What are we looking for? In terms of AO1, we're looking for knowledge and understanding of the features. In terms of AO2, the second order concepts, we're looking at causation, consequence, and change. So to get top marks here, we're going to have to give a narrative which organises material into a clear sequence of events, so chronology there leading to an outcome. The account of events analyses the linkage between them and is coherent and logically structured. So it wouldn't, if you're going to add a little bullet point of your own, you can't just talk about these 3 in silos. You must show how they're interconnected, the relationship between them, or how they link together. Therefore, you arrive at your analytical narrative. And then we need good specific subject knowledge here, AO1, that shows knowledge and an understanding. It says here no access to level 3, so you're basically capped here. If you do not go beyond aspects prompted by the stimulus points, you must add information of your own. Otherwise, no matter how good or sophisticated your discussion of the 2 points, you won't have access to level 3, which is obviously not what we want. There's an analytical narrative available from historychappy.com, which gives you the sort of linking lexicogrammatical leading language chunks that you can utilize to help you link and marry these events together. So we've got chain of linkages here, we've got the process word case, and some lexicogrammatical chunks from historical scholarship, which help you link cause and consequence. Thereby, again, no means mandatory, but they're there if you need them. Here's a good example from Edexcel. So it's albeit quantitatively very short, it's qualitatively strong because it does everything the mark scheme requires. So I'll let you read that. The response is a clear narrative and organises material into a clear sequence of events, so chronologically sound. It gives accurate and relevant information on how the strengthening of the Western loans led to Stalin's blockade, to AO1 there, of Berlin, and how this in turn led to the formation of West Germany. It's a good subject-specific knowledge. The response goes beyond the stimulus material, so they have access to level 3, and there is a clear understanding of the key features of the period. Fantastic. Quantitatively quite short, but qualitatively does exactly what's necessary because it hones in on the mark scheme. Here's probably a better example provided by my colleague Mr. Smith, so thanks to him for that. Mr. Smith, analytical narrative, but this time we're looking at the key events of detente between 70 and 79. Mr. Smith here is very generously underlined the linking terminology there, which shows how these events marry together into a logical sequence of events in chronological order. So if we look through what Mr. Smith has done here very adeptly and adroitly, he's ensured that whilst he's talking about these three events, he's added SALT 2 as his own. What we've done is we've married them together, and this is really the key here. Because we started by talking here about SALT 1, but then we've moved on to the Helsinki Accords. But the way he's married it here is the Helsinki Accords would not have been possible without this earlier cooperation, referring to SALT 1, and took the thawing of relations still further. So very adeptly he's married those events together, and that's going to be a key element of the AO2 requirement for this question, which prescribes that you link events together in a logical sequence. So all the key linking words there are underlined and highlighted. So thank you, Mr. Smith, for that excellent example. The third and final question that you're going to face is you need to explain two of the following. So you'll get a choice of three, a menu if you will. You need to pick two from it. They're always going to be in the format or explain the importance of X for Y. So the importance of something for something. Each of those will be worth 8, so cumulatively, once you've done your 2, it's worth 16. So what are we looking for here in terms of AO1, AO2? In terms of AO1, knowledge and understanding of features and characteristics, that's your subject knowledge elements. And then AO2, analysis of second order concepts. In this case, we're looking at consequences or significance. To get to level 3 of the mark scheme, between 6 and 8 marks, and for AO1 we need accurate and relevant information showing good knowledge and understanding of the period. Furthermore, for AO2 you need to show analysis of importance. It shows a line of reasoning that is coherent and logically structured. Each part of this answer is marked separately, so each bit is separate in the mark scheme. Okay. Question 3 then, so it focuses on importance. Here we have the Edexcel guidance, so the question is worth half your marks for the whole of the period study, so it is very, very important. Make sure you've kept 25 minutes of the exam time to answer, so 12 minutes for each section of this answer, question 3. It asks you to explain the importance of events and developments. You have a choice of 2 out of 3. Take time to make the choice, and that's good advice. You want to make sure that you've got enough ammo or information to answer each section before you start it. You don't want to waste time or lead yourself up a cul-de-sac and get halfway through and not have enough to say. So plan diligently and carefully. It'll be time well spent. Before you decide, be clear what you have to explain. The question is always worded as the importance of something for something. It says here, during your revision, always look at the importance of events that you're studying. What do they lead to? What was the effect of them? What difference did they make? Why did they matter? Just remember that. It's not going to be enough to explain the importance of X in and of itself, per se. It's going to be the importance of X for Y. So again, we're not looking at the causes of events or the events of the events. We're looking at the importance, significance, or consequence of those events, what impact they had. Here's a decent example from Edexcel. Quantitatively, not very long as you can see, but qualitatively it hones in on the importance of that and the impact they had. So we're looking at the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Brilliant. So it's the importance of Olympic boycotts, relations between the USA and the Soviet Union. So really focuses in on how that soured relations. The period of détente was dead in the water, and there was a tit-for-tat boycott. Soviet Union boycotted the Los Angeles Olympics in 1984. So it's a strong answer because it explains the importance by showing the consequences of the boycotts and their impact on the Cold War. It supports the argument with good detail, so sufficient AO1 to really marry that to the question. Fantastic. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. I wish you all the best of luck with your examinations. Thanks for viewing, and goodbye.